No worries. Hey, welcome to A Year of Trek. My name's Mish. I'm a Trekkie, and this is our live breakdown of Lower Decks. So we are looking at episode 7 of season 2. This is it's called Where Pleasant Fountains Lie. This was an interesting episode. I don't know. I found it humorous. Not gross. Not. It was a little bit different. I think it felt a little bit not episodic, but I think I kind of like that they've done that where like the last couple, even though the story is continuing, they're just like, oh, well, last week was one story and this is another story. It's not the continuation. So I think I kind of like that. So if you are just turning in, Your Trek covering Lower Decks, from here on out, we are going to be talking about the episode in detail, or at least as detailed as I can get. I have to make this a short thing anyway, because my daughter's volleyball game starts here soon, and I'm still at the house. Well, it's just right up the street. But anyway, so two major storylines in this one. It's so funny because they open up and it's like it says we open up this. They're helping out this this race. They've been in 100-year war because this computer talked them into it and convinced them that it was a good thing. And the first thing I thought of was, can anyone say A Taste of Armageddon? And even it was so funny because even Captain Freeman is like, oh, well, you're not the only one. And she even makes a comment about, well, at least you didn't like worship this person and all that kind of stuff. And of course, it goes up to this picture of them, like people bowing to this computer. And, so basically kind of pulling in all these different tropes of these civilizations being run by a computer and being at war and all that kind of stuff. So Lord Agmus, or the computer, Agmus, oh my God, it's Jeffrey Combs. Like, you just hear the voice and you're like, dude, that is so freaking cool. So very, very cool to have him as part of Lower Decks. So really, this whole story is set up in two plot lines. You've got the first plot where Mariner and Boimler take the evil computer back to the Daystrom Institute, and the second plot line is Billups, who's the engineer, the chief engineer, and Rutherford go on their little adventure. Primarily, Billups' mom shows up, and just apparently he's a prince who has actually renounced his throne because he really prefers engineering and Starfleet. But his mom, because whatever cultural thing it is, once he has sex, he's automatically the king of their realm. Hesperia, I think is what it's called, Hesperia. So, and he's like, no, I like being a virgin. I like being this. So it's kind of funny. Like, I was like, okay, interesting. So, so let's start off with Boimler and Mariner's timeline. So they get the job to take Agmus back to the Daystrom Institute. Initially, Boimler he's supposed to go on some expedition, and he gets his orders rescinded, and he's put on this thing with Mariner. So they're in a shuttlecraft, and they're flying along, and they hit a gravimetric sphere, and they end up crash landing on this desolate planet where it looks like there's other ships that had gotten pulled in and landed. My first thought was this was associated with that one episode where Tuvok and God, I can't remember who was it. it may have been Tuvok and Paris, if I'm not wrong, end up going. It was basically, it wasn't just a planet. They were actually sucked into a different dimension or something like that. And they get stuck on the planet with Tank Girl. So can't remember the actress's name. Wonderful actress. I've always loved that actress. But I was glad to see her on that show. When we get to that show, we'll talk more about it. So let's see. I thought it was funny that the replicator gave out black licorice, and then she's like, "Oh, the only food that tastes like poison." And I can totally sympathize because, well, black licorice, I really cannot stand the taste of black licorice, unless, of course, it is black sambuca, and I can't tell you why, or Asmith. Either of those, they taste like black licorice, but I can totally, well, maybe it's because my tongue is numb. That's really why I can't taste the black licorice part, but that's the only, I don't do black licorice. There's talk of possibly just burying Asmus, or Lord Asmus, this computer thing, like Data's head. Now, I thought, right when that was mentioned, I totally went to Nemesis, and I thought that Boimler, when Boimler was like, no, that he was going to be like, no, that was before. But he actually mentioned it was a cave, and that was basically a reference to the Next Generation episode Time's Arrow. So that was a two-parter, of course, a season finale and a season premiere. I can't remember what seasons, but it is okay. Of course, Boimler keeps on mentioning, oh, I did this on the Titan, and this happened on the Titan. Oh, this, and one of Mariner's responses was like, if you bring up your study abroad one more time. So I thought that how she kind of referenced that. They find fruit because they end up leaving the shuttlecraft to go and try and find help, and they find fruit that also tastes like black licorice. And then let's see. I say Boimler find. Oh, okay. So Boimler, because all this time you have this computer trying to manipulate the two of them into getting him connected to another computer. Because if he can get that connected, of course, he can create his evil drones and take over the planet or whatever. So, and they're just like, Boimler's starting to slowly be like, well, yeah, well, he could help us. He could help us. And Mariner's like, you're an idiot. Don't listen to him. So he actually was able to connect to a pad and then shows Boimler that it was really Mariner that got him reassigned. And so he kind of, he gets all pissed off, and then they leave. They end up getting into a fight because they end up getting to this one ship, and he's like, well, yeah, we can just use him to get into the ship. And she's like, no, we're just going to find another ship. So they get in a fight with no stunt doubles. Pretty impressed by that. And then he shoots her with a phaser, and then takes Asmus with him, and ends up going into the ship. Of course, they he gets in there, says, well, I'll connect you up to the nav system. And the computer's like, oh, okay. And says, oh, I can't get this one panel open. And he said, and Jeffrey Combs is like, hey, you just use my battery, and opens up the back battery pack. And then he gets connected in. Well, the computer's like, oh, now I have control. I was just using you. And Boimler's like, no. And this is how he says, you've been boimed. And it was all a ruse. He was basically just trying to get the computer to trust him so he could get to his battery pack to send off a special communication. I thought that was pretty cool. And so, of course, the computer ends up going back to the Daystrom Institute. There's a mention of 7 and 9. He says, I could be, because he's like, oh yeah. On their way back, he's like, well, I've deleted all my bad subroutines, and I'm just going to go. I can be, I could be the next 7 of 9. I'll be one of one, or Asmus of one. Now, one thing I didn't really like. There were only a few mentions in that timeline, or in that plot line. There's when they were in the Daystrom Institute, I was trying to see, would I see Nomad? Would I see, something like that? But I really didn't see anything that kind of stuck out. I will say that Asmus originally looked like the Whopper from War Games. So that was the first image that I had of him at the very, very beginning when we meet him. The second, so now, and that kind of is that timeline. So now let's go to let's go to Billups and Rutherford. So, of course, so Billups' mom shows up. Billups has a completely different name, and she's having trouble with her warp engine. And she's like, no, I'm not going to try. I'm not here to, trying to manipulate you or anything like that. I just need help because you're an engineer. So he gets Rutherford involved. Now, I can't remember, because he's like, when Rutherford was trying to figure out what planet he's from, he mentions a name. I can't remember what that name was, but he's like, oh yeah, that's the planet with the aliens that one group colonized. So that got me thinking, what if people from the Society of Creative Anachronisms, it's those people that dress up in medieval gear and fight in the park. You can see a total parody of it in the movie Role Models. What if that group colonized a planet just because there were dragons on it, and then their culture, the culture built out of that era? That's kind of how I see that planet being. When they go aboard the ship, I wrote this note. I love the dancer and in the background, because she's like, so it totally reminded me of just those LARP, those LARPers. And then of course the jester playing the lute. They're always there. They just don't go away. I just thought that was pretty funny. Of course, Billups fixes the engine, so he thinks, and he thinks his mom respects him now. And he's like, oh yeah. And then so he's telling this to Freeman. They're in the ready room, and then they see this big explosion on the side of the ship. And he's like, oh my gosh, I thought I fixed it. And he goes over, and it's like, oh, the queen is dead. And Tindy gets noticed that that Rutherford is dead. And we're like, killed Rutherford? Seriously? But of course the episode's not over. So Tindy goes on this mission to find Rutherford, and she's like, oh, well, at least his implant is still working. It's still sending out a signal. So she gets onto the ship and finds them having dinner. And then we find out it's all a ruse. So, but of course, Billups doesn't know this. He doesn't know this yet. And so he's like, he's telling the captain, hey, look, I have to resign. I have to take over for my mom. And I love the way I got a chuckle out of this. And I must perform the royal copulation. And I'm just like, oh my God. So, and it's funny because every time, like it goes between him and the camera will be on him, and then the camera will be on Freeman, and every time it comes back to him, he has some other royal accoutrement on him. He ends up having a band across his forehead. He's got the little I don't know what you'd call them, little shoulder things. He's got the sash. But every time you go back and forth, he has a little bit more on there. I found that kind of funny. So then, of course, as part of, and I kind of switched those two. So the whole, him talking to Freeman and then Tindy finding everybody that switches. But Tindy, so he says, so they go on to lose his virginity. Now his mom is like, oh no, he's gonna, he says, my guards are the best. She says, my royal guards are trained from birth to skip foreplay. So of course, then they're running away. Now he goes to Billups' room and he's just like, he's so reluctant. He's taking off his uniform. And then you have a male guard and a female guard, and they're just like, oh, we're ready for you. So then he drops his shorts and he's not wearing any underwear. And I'm like, and so I was curious if this, because this is the first thing I thought of, is this a reference to what George Lucas told Carrie Fisher about wearing a bra under her outfit for Star Wars? Because he told her, in space, people don't wear underwear. So is this that reference? I don't know. At least that's what I got out of it. Let's see. And then, of course, Rutherford runs in the room and he goes, oh, did his kingdom come? Okay, that's not an overt thing. And then, of course, they find out, it was all a ruse. And Billups is like, Mom, can't believe you did this. I love Starfleet. I love all this. Just leave me alone. And she's like, until next time. And then Tindy was just like, Tindy and Rutherford are talking, and they say, what is it? They say, it is, what is it? This is, I think Tindy says, there are going to be times where you seem like you died. Basically, just talking about, that this is going to happen. And Rutherford's response was something to the nature of, well, that's just life in Starfleet. Totally, because, of course, people die, people come back. We already kind of experienced that with Shax. So that was a whole episode. It's not the greatest, but I had fun. I like this episode. Not a lot of Easter eggs. I do think the whole, what is it? Shit, I gotta go back up here. No. Yeah, the whole concept of an SEA group taking over a planet because there's dragons on the planet. I think that's funny. If they were trying to play off the concept that nerds are virgins, and if you're a nerd who gets laid, then you're royalty. I think that was well done. I think I thought that was pretty funny. Yeah, no, I actually kind of like this episode. So, all right. I'm just going to cut it short for that because that's all that. And unfortunately, Rob wasn't able to tune in today and give his 2 cents. Probably because that's probably why we're so short, because the back and forth between me and Rob. Anyway, so later on the docket tonight, we have our regular show at 7. It might be 7:30, but right now it's programmed for 7. So until then, please be safe and live long.